Hi, everybody. It's Dr. Collins. Uh, Excited to be here to talk about chapters 1, 2, and 3 with you. I'm going to move through a little PowerPoint I created just to cover some of the main topics, and hopefully cover most of the things that are important to know that you've already read that I'd like to reinforce. So here we go. Okay, so I know this is one of your first classes, not your first class, but for some of you, but it's important to always know when you're operating and working that you're operating as a social worker. And so you want to operate from that lens and from that position. And so what is the mission of social work? To enhance human functioning by promoting and ensuring client access to resources such as health, safety, education, income. Social workers use a social justice framework and strive to support vulnerable populations by empowering marginalized peoples through structural and societal change. And so already in this definition, you can hear themes that are calling you to work at the micro, macro, and meso level, because in order to create structural and societal change, often you've got to work at a macro level, creating policy change, and at a meso level, creating community change. And so our mission really calls us to work at each level of practice, micro, meso, and macro. So what are vulnerable populations? Who are vulnerable populations? People who are economically, socially, environmentally oppressed, marginalized due to group identification. We'll talk about dimensions of diversity, such as people of color, elderly, women, youth, immigrants, refugees, and those with disabilities, to name a few. But of course, this is not exhaustive. And, you'll hear social justice a lot. In fact, social work education is guided by the social work, the Council on Social Work Education, which is our accrediting body, who gives us 9 competencies, which we must adhere to as schools of social work education, so that we're preparing you for these competencies. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. But you'll hear the term social justice, economic justice, racial justice, and environmental justice. And social justice at the foundation really means that people should have equal rights to resources offered by society, regardless of who you are, regardless of your dimensions of diversity. Everyone should have equal access. What's economic justice? Refers to those aspects of social justice that relate to economic well-being, employment, livable wage, pay equity, non-discrimination in employment, and access to sources of income. We know when it comes to dimensions of diversity, we don't have pay equity. We often have there's still gender pay gaps. We don't have livable wages. There are often people who are working 1 to 2 to 3 jobs on minimum wage, 40 to 60 to 70 hours a week, who are unable to pay basic bills like rent or the cost of food, and people who are living with food insecurity issues as a result. Environmental justice, which we're going to focus on a little more in this class, because again, our code of ethics, as well as our grand challenges, really call us to work on environmental justice. And I think social work has been a little deficient in tackling environmental justice. One, because I think we don't really know what that means. We don't know if we're qualified to do it. We don't know how it impacts people. But we're called to work on environmental justice because we know issues that affect the environment often disproportionately affect the people that we serve. So no group or community should bear a disproportionate share of environmental hazards or risks. We'll learn more about that as we move through this course. And then really, we're here to talk about the helping process in direct social work practice. And what is direct social work practice? When you're working with individuals, couples, families, groups, and organizations, clients in the communities. At the micro level, so we tend to look at it through the ecological systems theory. We work micro, macro, and then macro. And so working at the micro level really means working with individuals, couples, and families. Typically, we see social workers doing this as a social worker, case manager, advocate, educator, mediator. Those are some of the traditional roles that you hear as a social worker people refer to. Meso level, again, typically working with groups and organizations. You'd still hear people call social workers advocates who are working at this level, but maybe a program director, developer, facilitator, administrator. And then the macro level, social planning, community organizing, looking at legislation, developing legislation, refining legislation. And that's at every level as well, with individuals, families, groups, organizations, communities, and regionally, locally, and globally. So what guides us as social workers? I've already alluded to this or started talking about it. The CSWE stands for the Council on Social Work Education. Again, they are the accrediting body that guides social work education, gives us the 9 competencies. We plan a curriculum. And so that, not only is there generally a standard curriculum for people who are graduating from social work programs. It's good for you, it helps guide curriculum, but also employers know generally what they can look forward to when they're hiring an MSW student. They know what the competencies are that we teach to. And some of the competencies are ethical and professional behavior, trying to achieve social, racial, economic, environmental justice, ADI, anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, working on policy initiatives, using evidence-informed practice, and then engaging with all those different groups, individuals, groups, families, communities, organizations, assessing them, intervening with them, and evaluating them. So those are the 9 competencies that we teach to. And then also NASW, the National Association of Social Workers, produces our code of ethics that we have to adhere to as licensed social workers. It's what protects us as social workers, the profession, our clients, the community. And the NASW is our largest professional social work organization. I'd highly encourage you to join as a student, because the membership fees are a little bit less expensive when you're a student. And then the code of ethics at the beginning has 6 values. And then also standards, again, that pertain to community, individuals, the practice, colleagues. And so go ahead, if you haven't, take a moment and look through the different standards, because we have to adhere to those as social work practitioners, but they're guided by these 6 values of service, social justice, believing that every person has dignity and worth, really understanding the value of human relationships, not only in the clients, with the clients that we serve, but also with all of our colleagues around us that are also serving them, understanding the benefit from engaging in relationship, that not only is that something that we enter into to achieve goals, but it's also a place of healing for a lot of people. Integrity, doing what you say you're going to do, being where you say you're going to be, letting people know that you're trustworthy. And then competence is really about practicing within your scope. So doing what you've been trained to do. There are some things that have influenced social work: globalization, technological advances, learning how to manage technology as a social worker, managing social networking platforms, but also, texting as well, and understanding how technology is affecting our clients for better and for worse, with violence, bullying, stalking, but also issues of isolation. Social work is always plagued by funding issues. The pandemic obviously caused more isolation and loss for people, as well as a number of other things. And then, something that we need to be really mindful of, and we'll talk about throughout this course, and especially in Unit 8, is self-care, is taking care of us and filling our cup, because it sure is very difficult to work with other people if our cups are empty and we're not doing things to intentionally take care of ourselves. That was a really brief overview of Chapter 1. Chapter 2, some of the philosophies of social work that guide our practice. I already started talking about this, but the ecological systems theory is that clients are within the context of social and environment, and people are embedded in the systems that they live in, like family, work, school, peer group, faith community. And so this really helps us put, often for people, the onus on the situations around them, rather than just putting the onus on them for why they are where they are in life. And in doing that, it avoids really over simplistic explanations of why somebody is where they are. You know, for example, oppressive policies, discrimination, racism, ageism, sexism, all of these things contribute to why a person is potentially excelling or not. And that helps us understand the environment in which somebody lives and what they've been dealing with, again, which contributes to ultimately where they are in life. Concepts: people need to be treated as individuals. And then, you know, we all have risk factors and protective factors. So, you know, protective factors are things that help us. A good example of a protective factor that I love to always provide is that, you know, for kids, even if they have negative influences in their lives, there's so much good research to show that one caring adult who's pouring into them in their lives is enough to change the trajectory of their lives. Other protective factors are a sense of humor. Other protective factors could be a social network. Other protective factors could be having a job or going to school. And so there's a number of protective factors as well as risk factors, and you'll learn more about those. They're not predictive, but often they can help us understand how to better serve somebody when we understand what the risk factors are, and then how to lean into those protective factors for more strength, and resources. So again, Chapter 2 goes over a little bit of the micro, meso, and macro system. Person and environment is, you know, the ecosystems theory. We really talk about, when we're looking at the person, you know, what's going on in that micro world? What's going on with their biology? What's going on with their friendships, family, peer? What are their lived experiences? Those are all in that micro circle that impact who that person is and how they're showing up in front of you. And then the meso community is the organizations that they access, the community and neighborhoods they live in. You know, one example I can tell you about is when I, a long time ago, I taught at the Attorney General's office. For 7 years, I worked in the High-Tech Crimes Bureau, and my job was to go into schools and talk to schools, teachers, administrators, parents, kids about how to navigate the digital world. And I was going into a neighborhood, and I was going to talk to them about I was going to talk to the students about how to make choices online. And all of the students in this district had just gotten laptops. And the parents came to me and said, "Sarah, I appreciate your talk about digital safety and how to make smart choices online, about how you present yourself and who you're engaging. However, my big concern is my kids walking home and going to and from school every single day with a laptop in their backpack." And the parents told me, you know, in my opinion, my student is a target for violence. And so, you know, the community, this just goes to highlight that the community in which somebody grows up in influences who they are, how they see the world, and what their lived experiences might be. And then again, you know, going back to that macro practice of larger society, the policies, and just the things that are going on in the larger society when you're growing up, like a pandemic right? A pandemic has shaped a lot of our kids and us. You know, my son spent 4th and 5th grade in online school as a 4 and 5-year-old. And, you know, that really was the foundation for the beginning of his academic career. And so, you know, we've had to work around issues related to reading, because they just weren't getting the same level of education as 4-year-old and 5-year-olds, with the pandemic at play. And so, again, when we're looking at somebody and assessing somebody, it's so important to take into account all of those different levels that have helped shape the person. Okay, strengths perspective. This is a framework we use all the time. It's something I'm so proud of as a social worker. And really it looks at what are the person's strengths? How are they resilient? What are their assets? And it helps to reduce the inclination to pathologize people and to say, you know what, this person has been through something crummy, and what they're experiencing is a normal response to what they've experienced, rather than saying something's wrong with them for experiencing something that's been crummy. And so, you know, the strengths perspective really helps us reframe the way we look at people, individuals, families, communities, and kind of flip the script a little bit. So again, we believe that strengths, assets, resources, which within the individual and family are going to be protective factors. And those are things that we should look for initially when we're starting to do assessments. Also, we happen to live in a deficit-based society. So I'm talking to all of you out there. If right now I asked you, write a list of the things you're not so great at and the things you're great at, most of us would have a list on the not so great side that was much longer than the great side, because in many of our worlds, we hear often about how we're not meeting the demands, how we're not achieving to the level we're expected to achieve. And so for a lot of people, pulling out their strengths is really a gift, because many of the people we're going to serve have heard in multiple systems over multiple years and decades that they are deficient. And because of that message, they've internalized it, believe it, and can't even begin to see some of their strengths. So when you're working with somebody, some of the first things to do are to send messages that this is going to be a judgment-free zone. You can be who you are, exactly where you are in life with me. And try initially when you're engaging with somebody to, if you have the luxury of moving around and not being confined to an office, to do things you both enjoy, like maybe going for a walk or playing basketball, or coloring a picture. Be mindful of cultural practices. You know, as social workers, we're called to understand dominant culture, practice cultural humility, and engage in culturally responsive practice. So that means not only trying to be aware of other people's dynamics, but acutely aware of your own and what your value biases are and how you potentially impose those on other people when you're working with them. So that's a big one right there. And try and incorporate humor, joy, and laughter when you can, when it's appropriate, and also recognize that humor, joy, and laughter in other people is a strength. So the 6 principles of strengths are, again, the initial focus of the helping process is on the person's strengths, their interests, their hopes, their desires, their dreams. Where do you want to be? If somebody could ask you the miracle question, you know, what do you want your life to look like? Like, if you could dream up anything, what would it be? Their knowledge, their capabilities, and stay away from things like, what's your diagnosis? What are your symptoms? What are your weaknesses? I promise they are very aware of that. Our job is to start to, again, flip that script and reframe the conversation. Because once people start to have self-confidence, any of those tasks that we're giving them start to become more manageable, more doable, and they have, you know, increased risk or increased ability to have self-efficacy, which means believe they can do the things they set out to do. This is really important. The helping relationship, the helping process is collaborative. We are not the experts, and we really look to our clients for expertise in their lives and their communities, and we really are the learners. And so also, we believe that everyone has the capability to learn and grow and transform, and that people have the potential to be incredibly resilient. Also, sorry, I just said this one. People have the right to try, they have the right to fail. And I tell my kids all this time, my job is not to prevent you from making a mistake. My job is to prevent you from making a mistake that's so big that you can't turn it around. But for people trying and failing and getting up and trying again, build self-esteem. And it's really healthy. It's really healthy to have the courage to try, even if you're not certain that you're going to succeed, and to try again and then be successful. So our clients have the right to try too. Helping activities in naturally occurring settings. So have people do it where they've got their natural resources, their informal helping communities, where they are going to be successful, whether you're with them or not. And then again, viewing their community as an oasis of expertise, but also strength and support. And finding those allies who will provide support. So here are some silly strengths that, silly but important to acknowledge when you're working with somebody that you can point out. Humor, insight. Insight is a huge strength. If somebody can understand and have some ability to articulate why they do what they do, why they think what they think, that's a strength. Even if they have miles to go, even the beginning of insight is a strength that they're beginning to see, and that journey can keep unfolding. Creativity, morality, initiative. And again, sometimes it takes you, even in their struggle, highlighting how they've been survivors and thrivers and pulling out those strengths for them. Again, personal qualities, traits, virtues, what people know about the world around them, the talents they have, and then cultural stories that help keep people going. Pride in being a survivor and a thriver is also a strength. The community that they belong to, any spirituality tends to be a strength and a protective factor for a lot of people. And then how do you find these questions? Ask questions. Or how do you find strength? Ask questions. Ask people to tell you their story. Ask people to tell you where they have supports, what they would like their life to look like if they could dream, how they've made it through their journey. And it's in their answers that you can identify their strengths. And again, I already said this, but it's in struggle that they have often demonstrated resilience and strengths, but may need you to flip that script and reframe it for them. Cultural humility is another one. I've already talked about this, so I don't want to gloss over this because it is the bedrock, one of the bedrocks of social work, but we need to be so cognizant of our own values, where we've come from, what our person environment, our ecosystems, that micro, meso, macro looks like for us. Because that for us shapes exactly who we are and how we see the world and how we interact with the world. Our beliefs, customs, values, culture shapes how we do everything, from the way we dress, to the way we engage in family, to the way we behave at work and in school and with peers. And so we need to be aware of those, aware what is part of dominant culture, what's not, and also place a lot of emphasis, beauty, value on other cultures as well. And understand too that in valuing those other cultures that we find strength and stronger teams, more dynamic teams, because we have so many different perspectives that contribute value to the team. Accept cultural difference, and not only accept it, but affirm it as a beautiful contribution. Accommodate cultural norms. Self-awareness is the foundation of cross-cultural encounters, which is why you will reflect a lot in this class. Humility about your worldview, that it's one view, not the only view, not the right view. It's just a view. And you will really wrestle with this, especially when you're working with people who are like you, because we tend to have bias when we work with people who are like us, but also when we work with people who are not like us. If they don't have the same value set, it can be difficult to think that, it can be difficult not to think that they are wrong for doing what they're doing, rather than just thinking that's just different than the way I do it. And remember to be collaborative and always client-centered. Again, embracing self-determination, allowing people to be exactly where they are in a non-judgment, in a judgment-free zone, and allowing them to make decisions with all and providing the information they need to make decisions. Anti-oppressive and anti-racist practice. So counters a tendency for social workers to reenact oppression that is structured into social welfare systems. It helps us to think about our positionality, intersectionality, dimensions of diversity, and understanding again how all of those things have shaped all of us. Power and privilege have shaped us, as well as oppressive policies, ideology, systems have shaped us as well, and being cognizant of those and learning more about those within ourselves and others. But also anti-oppressive practice is not just about awareness, but it's also about dismantling practices that do not produce equitable situations for all. Always moving with a trauma-informed lens, understanding that trauma can happen at an individual level as well as a community level. So remember, you're going to think about things like, instead of what's wrong with the person, you're going to reframe things to what's happened to this person that's maybe changed the trajectory of their lives. Many people have experienced trauma. Some have experienced it at an individual level. Some have experienced it at an intergenerational level. For example, with things like historical trauma, the ending of slavery, racism, the treatment of people of color by police. Those things are considered historical trauma and can be passed on from generation to generation. So it's always important to assess for trauma. Again, what's happened in your life, what's happened rather than what's wrong with you. Why are you doing that? What's wrong? Again, you'll see in all of these theories and perspectives, we're seeing the same, that we're working hand in hand in tandem with our person, not as the expert, but as a collaborator. In order to build trust, and remember that social work value integrity, be trustworthy. Do what you say you're going to do. Be where you say you're going to be at the time you say you're going to be, and trustworthy. Create a safe space, and then understand that trauma can be triggered while you're working, and be aware of that. And then also, this is part of our competencies as well as just practice. You know, we integrate research into practice and policy so that we can promote informed decision-making when we're working with individuals, families, groups, communities, and organizations. Okay, so wrapping up here, chapter 3. So what are you going to learn about in this class? What are the stages we're going to go through? The helping process. So we're going to learn about engagement, assessing, intervention, evaluation, termination. And we're going to do those things with individuals, families, and we're going to look at it a little bit through a group lens. So, you know, when you're in that engagement phase, this is critical. There's a stat that most healing happens in relationships. That's also a value of social work. Even when the correct theories and frameworks are applied to people, it's in the relationship between a therapist or social worker and a client that healing occurs. And so it's so important to build rapport and learn how to engage with a client and be trustworthy, because a lot of the healing that needs to happen happens in the context of that relationship. But if you're thinking a little bit about your situation where you are with the client and those engagement skills, think about, are you in a private space? Do people have the freedom to talk about it without feeling like somebody else is being heard? Is there enough light? How's the room temperature where you are? Is the space comfortable? Do they feel like they could leave if they had to? Are the chairs comfortable? Watch where your desk is. Make sure people have the opportunity to leave if they want. Are there toys, books, coloring books for kids if you're working with kids, or if you're working with a parent who brings a kid? It's helpful to have those things so that the parent can concentrate. If you're doing it remotely, that's a little bit trickier because it's hard to totally guarantee confidentiality. Children, family, or any dogs, cats, people can cause noises in the environment can cause distraction. So at the beginning, during that engagement, initial assessment, you're really exploring clients' needs, trying to build rapport. Again, I always say, expect a climate of distrust. When somebody comes to you who's potentially been navigating systems, they might have been burned by people who were supposed to love them, but also by people who had a lot of power in systems. And so expect that there might be a climate of distrust, and that it might take time for people to learn to trust you. And so it takes time to build that rapport and show them that you're going to be a trustworthy person who sticks around. You're assessing the problems through their eyes. And also, if you're getting other reports, if this is an involuntary client, you're assessing the problems through other reports you're getting. You're discussing goals and potentially making referrals depending on where you work, maybe for a drug assessment or a parenting assessment or a mental health assessment. So you explore the problem, what brought you here, tell me in your own words. Even if you've got a court report in front of you, it's important to hear through their lens what they're thinking. And talk about, this next point is so important. What are your roles and responsibilities as a social worker? What can you do? What can't you do? What are elements of confidentiality and privacy? Let them know and remind them regularly what elements of confidentiality are, because you definitely don't want people disclosing things and then after saying, oh, I'm really sorry, I never told you this, but I've got to report this. I can't keep this confidential. So I already talked about this. So here's what I, as a social worker, have to do. Here are my roles. Here are my responsibilities. Here's what I'm going to think about for you, and do that collaboratively. And this is often a great opportunity to break down misconceptions about what you can and what you can't do, and what the client can and can't do. So have an open conversation about that. Again, trust is the foundation of this. Do what you're going to do. Be where you say you're going to be on time. Empower your client. They should feel like you're generally interested. If you're always checking your watch or looking away or shaking your foot, they might feel like they're a burden and you don't want to be there. Be punctual, listen to them, give them signs that you're listening to them, shake your head, make verbal noises, have an open body posture, try not to cross your legs or your arms. That shows a more closed off body posture. So watch your facial expressions. Be authentic, bring you to the table. And let them know that, again, you're going to work together collaboratively. Ask them what they want you to call them. That's a sign of respect. Again, establishing rapport, again, assume it's going to take time. Think about yourself. You probably wouldn't disclose everything. And when your clients are coming to you, they're so vulnerable. They've got things to talk about that are really hard to talk about, maybe produce feelings of shame or embarrassment. And so give them the grace of giving them time to slowly disclose these things to you. And especially if they're coming with what's quote unquote socially unacceptable behavior, those are really difficult things to talk about. I often say we get the tip of the iceberg. We get the things that are easiest to talk about, and then in time, the stuff below the surface that's more embarrassing or produces more shame comes out. We can talk about this with them and with us, talk about religious beliefs, spiritual beliefs, because again, those are also protective factors. What are cultural preferences that you should be mindful of as a social worker? Again, that shows respect. Be aware of your body posture. So start where the client is, accept where the client is, and it has to be a non-judgment zone. The clients are going to see it all over you if you go in with judgment. So be very mindful of that and try to be open-minded that they're coming to you vulnerably and they're hoping that you're going to listen with respect and compassion and empathy. Use reflective language, reframe things they're saying, further responses, maybe repeat a word that they said, ask clarifying questions. I heard you say that he was enraged. When you say enraged, what does that mean? Simple reflection, and then saying, so I said that, this is what I heard you say. Is that what you actually meant? Oftentimes I've found that when you say it wrong, clients will correct you, but let them know that you're listening and that you care by asking those things, paraphrasing things, and then asking, did I get it right? Is that what you meant to tell me? Is that what you want me? Is that how you were feeling? And then we move to implementation and goal attainment. So we talk about, can one successfully complete what they would like to complete? Do they believe in themselves? So self-efficacy, remind them of their strengths, set realistic goals. And I always love this. So imagine a ladder with rungs that are really far apart and trying to get up that ladder. And you're like, oh my gosh, I can't even reach the next rung. How am I going to climb the ladder? And then imagine a ladder with rungs really close to each other so that you can just cruise up them. When you're making goals for a client, make sure they're smart, make sure they're specific, measurable, attainable, and time restricted. Because you want to make sure if you're setting a goal that somebody's going to be able to achieve it, because that helps to build self-confidence. Track progress. How are you doing? You all are going to do this in this class. You're going to think of a behavior, you're going to set a goal, make sure it's a SMART goal, and then you're going to track it. And you're going to have to find an intervention that is appropriate for this kind of a behavior the best you can. And then assess barriers. What's getting in the way of you achieving this goal? Change is hard, right? And so what are the barriers outside of your control that are getting in the way? Is there a resource that you need that would help you attain the goal that you don't have? Is it something personal that's getting in the way? So you're going to assess barriers. And then occasionally it's nice to connect with somebody, like I tried to with you, telling you little stories about my son to make a application come to life, but also to humanize me. Do that with your clients as well, but I would say be very, very careful. Self-disclosure is a slippery slope. Always ask yourself, why am I doing this? Am I doing this to help me? Is this me processing me, or is this going to help the client? Sometimes in some cultures, people don't want to hear what's going on in the therapist world or the social workers world. And some might compare themselves to you. What if they can't do it the same way you did it? And so be very careful. Use a lot of discernment and discretion when you're thinking about self-disclosure. And then finally, evaluation and termination. So as social workers, we evaluate practice. So we're always evaluating because we don't want to waste people's time or energy. Is what we're thinking, are we reaching our goals? Is the intervention we established working? What are we evaluating the results? Are we getting the change that we hoped for? So that's it for me for chapters 1 through 3, just a quick overview of them. I hope you enjoy the reading in this book as much as I do, and I look forward to engaging with you on Blackboard.